Okay, so good morning. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Mark Hand. I'm a director at Mobility Ways. I'll just give you a bit of housekeeping to start with. In terms of questions, and we want lots of them, please, as you go through today's webinar, please use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen, not the chat. Do ask questions in the Q&A, and we will come to those at the end of the session. Just to explain the running order, so I'll soon introduce our guest speaker today, Beth Morley. We're going to show you a brief video case study, just showing some behaviour change in action, and then Beth will present to you for around about 25 minutes. We'll talk briefly then about some new software we've created to help in terms of behaviour change. And then we'll move to the Q&A, which hopefully we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the session. So I guess a number of you would have seen President Trump yesterday talking to the UN Council and suggesting that climate change was a sham or a scam, in his words. And there's a part of me that really wanted that to be true. However, science suggests otherwise, and the fact that so many of you have joined us today would suggest to me that you're in agreement that actually in the real world we need to focus on this issue. And of course, time is moving very quickly. It's not on our side. 2030, just 4 years away, when many of our organisations have set targets for emission reduction. And so we know that one of the challenges around delivering that is, of course, behaviour change. And that includes within the area of the commute. So that's what we're focusing on today and tackling that with behavioural science. So I wanted to introduce our speaker, Beth Morley, who's a human insight lead. I had a very long bio from Beth. Her work and the things she's got involved in are quite amazing, but I've actually had to shorten that for this session. So I'm just going to read out a brief summary, but you'll hear a lot more from Beth in a couple of moments. So a behaviour change specialist skilled in stakeholder engagement, and she's got experience working in community engagement and inclusive and equitable transition. She has an MSc in applied behaviour change and has devised and led customer and stakeholder consultation for local authorities, for OEMs and industry partners. She's got a wide range of knowledge and experience working with stakeholders from across the globe on all aspects of mobility So a very warm welcome to Beth. Thanks for joining us today. Just before Beth speaks to you, we just wanted to show you a brief case study involving an organisation called NSERC, just demonstrating behaviour change in action.
NSERC is one of the biggest glass manufacturers. We have about 1,000 employees at Elton. One of our challenges is to reduce the amount of travel into site every day.
A lot of our work is making sure that we reduce our carbon footprint, so Mobility Ways is helping us to reduce the commute emissions that are going out.
After running the travel survey, we got a lot of data. It just made us aware of how people travel to work, how ready they are to car share, what their attitudes to electric cars are. And it helped give us a plan for the future. We've been able to introduce our lift share scheme. If you car share with somebody, we pay £1 per journey into work.
And we also have a prize draw, which has really encouraged people to get on the app. So the Commute Boost is targeted at getting our walkers and cyclists involved as well, so that we're able to sustainably incentivise.
We wanted to use it as an attraction tool as well for candidates applying for roles at NSERC. Where the sites are based, they're not the most accessible for public transport, and we found that was a barrier. We explored various different options, but the most effective and most cost-effective way was using the Mobility Ways app.
Since Since we've launched Mobility Ways, we've seen a big reduction in miles off the road. There's been 145,000 miles reduced off the road, and that has resulted in £42,000 being saved as well by our people.
At NSERC, we've been able to benchmark our commute emissions using a travel survey. We use that data to receive an A-cell score. First year of using the app, it showed a 6% reduction in single occupancy drivers. I think success for NSERC long term would be having as many people car sharing or using the most environmentally friendly methods to come to work.
I think that's over to me. So thanks very much to Mobility Ways for inviting me in to talk today. My name is Beth Morley. I'm from Cenex. If people don't know, Cenex is a not-for-profit research and consultancy organisation. We're originally formed as the Centre of Excellence for Zero-Emission Technology, and we now work as a not-for-profit, separate from government, primarily in electrification and shifting of powertrains of vehicles. But there's a team of us who work in sort of what we call mobility, but modal shift, and that crucial question of, we know that it's not just about changing how we power our vehicles, but it's changing how we travel and how we use them. Great. So it's a bit, I feel a little bit of it that this is quite a tricky topic, because a lot of the time people want an answer, like it's a question, what's the answer? And there isn't really an easy, this is how you change behavior, and this is how you change travel behavior. If there was an easy answer, we wouldn't, many of us probably wouldn't be in jobs. And it does very much depend on a huge amount of circumstances and all sorts of other things. What I was going to take you through today is starting off with a little bit of theory around kind of behavioural science, just a few explanations, yeah, not going too deep into that. I'm sure there's some people on the call that know a huge amount about it, and there might be others that don't know any, so apologies if it's all stuff you've heard and deal with every day, but hopefully it's useful to you and to others. And then I'll go through some various kind of, what are the barriers, what are the sorts of things we look at when we think about sustainable staff travel and commuting, and pepper that with some examples and instances I've come across. I hope the sound is okay. I've got someone drilling today, putting in my charge point, which is very exciting for my first ever electric car. So next slide. Right. Yeah, so I always find, without having to kind of do a psychology degree or go into, really into depth around what is behavior and how do we, why do we do what we do? I always think the system 1 and system 2 thinking is a really helpful thing for everybody to be conscious of. Anyone who's designing campaigns or looking at trying to influence people and their behavior. So yeah, system 1 and system 2 thinking, I think, are very helpful things to be conscious of, and help you to understand how people come to making decisions. This was originally described by a psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, and it was explained how that we have 2 ways of approaching decision making and approaching our behavior. One is the systems 1 thinking, sometimes called type 1 thinking or fast thinking. And this is a very instinctive, automatic, unconscious decisions that we make. And most of the things that we do on an everyday basis are made using this way of processing information and thinking, where we're really not conscious that we've even made a decision. I think it varies what percentage people would say we act in system 1 thinking, but the majority of stuff that we do is based in system 1 thinking. System 2 thinking, or type 2 or slower, is where we are making maybe more complex decisions, but where we bring in a bit more logic, try and kind of bring in a bit more information. We're actually consciously thinking through the problem and then deciding what to do about it. There's a couple of things there might be misconceptions around this sort of description of our brains and our decision-making process. So it isn't a description of our brain structure. There's no brain structure that does system 1 thinking and brain structure that does system 2 thinking. It's just a way of explaining how we process information. So you can't kind of isolate one neurologically. And they're not so sequential. So it's not that you might first approach a problem, apply systems 1 thinking, and then if that doesn't work, you bring in systems 2. It really can depend on the context and the circumstance, which one you would use. Although the sort of default, easy, everyday stuff does tend to go to systems 1 first, but that doesn't mean that it always would. And there is also this idea that, and it even says on the slide here, that systems 2 thinking is rational. But actually, both systems 2 and systems 1 can be influenced by biases, and doesn't necessarily mean that we would make rational decisions even when we slow down and take in information. And maybe could be more logical, but it depends on that information that we're taking in and what we're seeing. So there are things that help us in that we've termed as heuristics, are mental shortcuts. They're ways that we make decisions, or and can be defined as things that are good enough. So when we throw a ball and we judge where it's going to go, like, we don't actually have the exact data of how fast that ball is traveling and the trajectory of it, but we get a good idea of where it's going to go. And that's an easy way to think about heuristics, but we have all these shortcuts that we use in our brain to make decision making easier. Some of those things include things like confirmation bias, which is rather relevant in this day and age, I think, and what Mark was saying earlier about certain people saying certain things. We will tend to remember, look for, and take in information that chimes with our worldview and our beliefs and values. So information that contradicts stuff that we already believe in or already think to be true, or that feel right to us from a belief and a value perspective, will be more likely to be taken in. And if they conflict, we'll tend to forget them or not pay attention to them. We have loss aversion, which is a way of describing the fact that we would much rather avoid loss than risk pursuing gain. So, and this isn't everybody, like, different people have different ways of approaching things, but in general, we tend to worry more about losing things than we do about gaining them, and we're less likely to take that risk if we think we might lose out. And I think that's one that's quite useful to remember when it comes to travel and time and things like that. You can also use framing in the opposite way to try and sort of combat some of that loss aversion. So, and then marketing does this a lot. So yeah, framing shows us that we can put information out there that makes it look like we're going to gain and kind of minimizes the loss, or think about how we're saying things, or how we're taking information that makes it things seem more positive, and kind of mitigates this concern of loss. And another one, and there are others within this, these are just a few examples, but the bandwagon effect, which I always think is a really interesting, mainly because it's got a fun example, is, we tend to do things because other people are doing them. And this isn't just like, oh, my mates around me are doing it, but there's a really good example of a college study in America where they put out a lot of posters to try and prevent binge drinking. And so in the posters, they said things like, 80% of students binge drink too much, and things like that. And what they found was it had the opposite effect, because people would see those posters, or the students would see those posters and think, oh, I can, everybody's doing it, I might as well join that, I'll jump on the bandwagon. I'm not unusual for drinking a lot. And so it kind of really reinforced the behavior that they were trying to address. So I'm going to quickly go through some models and frameworks that have been developed in behavioural science and behaviour change discipline. These, there's a limit to whether or not you need to kind of be strictly applying these in an everyday context, but I think they do give some helpful guidance on how to think about the behaviour that you're trying to address and how to approach that without having to be a top professor in psychology or anything like that. Next slide. So yeah, I've picked out 3 here of what I would consider like either the most talked about, the most used, or potentially the most useful. One that you may, I'm sure people on the call have heard of, and some may have not, but you may come across whenever you start talking about changing behavior. It's called COMB, which stands for capability, opportunity, motivation, leading to behavior. This was described by a team at UCL, Michi and all, and there's a lot of resources out there, because the whole kind of premise behind developing the COMB model, and it also has a companion piece called the Behaviour Change Wheel, was to try and make something that was accessible for practitioners working, on the sort of front line, as it were, of trying to change behavior, rather than something that sat in an academic space and was not that applicable. So they have a lot of guidance and a lot of support. There's a really great book that's I think very easy to understand, and takes you through the process of how to understand people's behavior, or the behavior that you want to change, and then what you might want to do about it. The COMB model, so we divide things up into physical capability, and psychological capability. That's our ability to do something, and that could be whether we're physically able to access it and use it. Can people ride a bike, for example? And then psychological capability. So do they feel confident riding a bike? Are they happy to ride the bike on the road to work, or is it very scary and dangerous? And those things need to be in place in order for them to feel comfortable doing the behavior. And then we have motivation, which is very much linked to the systems thinking as well. So you've got reflective motivation. So is that, when people have got the information, they sit down and it chimes with their values and their perceived version of who they want to be and their self. And so that, they sit down and they think, yeah, this is something that I really want to do. I've thought it through, and I've got the information that's kind of motivating me to do that. But we also have the automatic motivation, which is the sort of habit. And like if you might really want to ride a bike and believe that it's important to save the planet, but then you look out the window and it's raining and you just want to get in the car. So you just, that's your motivation has gone out the window. And then you have physical opportunity and social opportunity. So that's it, do you own a bike? Are there sort of, again, suitable routes for you to cycle on, or is it all a motorway to your workplace, for example? And social opportunity, if you got to the office having ridden your bike, would everybody think you were really weird and be, that's the odd person on the bike? Or is it actually part of your culture at your workplace? Or as you're riding the bike around the city and the towns where you live, do people treat you with respect, or do they treat you like you're an annoyance? So those things will impact and affect our opportunity and how comfortable we feel using displaying a bike, or displaying a type of behavior. So with all those things in place, and they all influence each other as well, so and there's all these sort of feedback loops that are going on, then we can see the behavior taking place. And if the behavior takes place and is successful, then that will increase the motivation as well. So we even see that if you can get the behavior happening, then you can increase the motivation, because people start to see that it's something they can do and that they want to do. So that's a whistle-stop tour around Combi. Next slide. So this is called ISM, the individual, social and material, and there's other ways of describing what this is kind of pulling together. But I think it's a really crucial one because it's all about looking at the system around a behavior, and we very often focus on the individual, and we've got to get somebody to change what they do, but the reality is that no individual, no behavior sits with just an individual. Very often it's part of a system around it. That's the social system and the material system. Sometimes you might refer to the macro and micro, or there's the different levels. Sometimes you see like an onion kind of diagram. And this just helps you to acknowledge that if you don't have the structure around the individual, things like the right rules, regulation, access to the right technologies and infrastructure, and the right kind of things that you need, and you don't have the right sort of social structure around that, the sort of social norms, if it doesn't chime with your identity and how you want to portray yourself, if you don't have the institutions that can support someone to do something, then even somebody with all the things in the middle, the individual values and beliefs and all that kind of stuff, will struggle to display the behavior that they want. Electric vehicles is a really, I think, good example here, where you might have someone that really does want to use an electric car and wants to switch over. But if they don't have the material things around them, like charging infrastructure, if the technology isn't developed enough to allow them to undertake the journeys that they want to do, then they're going to struggle to switch. And if they don't have, if they're too expensive, also if it's, if it's a bit of an odd thing, if nobody else has got one, that means there's no garages that can help you fix it. That means there's nobody you can ask for advice when you're purchasing your car. If you need a charge point installed, it means there's nobody to come and, how do you even find out how to do that? And so we've seen over the last few years, not only the technology of the electric vehicles develop, but also that system around it of increasing infrastructure, and it's heavily increasing, and increasing access to the system around the vehicle that allows you to make the switch. Next slide. Yep, and the last one that I'm going to talk to you about is EAST, easy, attraction, social and timely. So this was developed by the Behaviour Change Unit, UK Behaviour Change Unit, which was originally set up by Downing Street, but they now act as a separate consultancy. But they coined this and put out this framework, and I think it's a really great one and a really accessible way to think about what you're doing and whether it's really going to have the impact that you expect it to. So if you want to get people to do something, then it needs to be easy. If anything is, have you removed as many barriers as possible? Have you made it as simple as possible? It needs to be attractive. If people don't want to, if it isn't something that looks good to do, or people, looks fun to do, then there's very few people. You might get a few that are really kind of, from a values perspective, keen to do it, but the vast majority of people are not going to pick that up. There needs to be a sense of social networking and togetherness around this. So the Mobility Ways app is, it has that great kind of way of creating a social network within the company. And it needs to have that timely aspect. So really thinking about whether you're actually addressing people at the right time for them, in a way that they'll be most at the point where they'll be most receptive. We'll get onto that, these things a bit more as I go through. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, so I might have to start rushing a bit, but we'll see. Next slide. So yeah, I'll go through some barriers. I think we can share the slides afterwards, so if I have to do anything not in as much detail, then you can have a look later. Next slide. 10 minutes. Okay, that should be okay. So this is from various pieces of work that we've done at Cenex and that I've been involved in, looking at what are the challenges really when it comes to sustainable commuting, and trying to sort of list out what are the key things that you've got to think about and work out whether you're addressing in your plans. The first one is around how easy it is to use a car. And some of these, I think, are, they are quite obvious stuff, but they sometimes are overlooked. And I think we all know that if getting in your car and driving to work, where you've got a great big massive car park and it's free to park and it's all great, it makes it incredibly difficult to get anybody to do anything different. So if you don't have any kind of control or restriction or management over where people are parking and how easy it is for them to drive to site and use a car to get to site, then it makes it very difficult. You do need those sort of push elements that restrict access to the undesirable behaviour. And we do obviously have things like congestion that will make it difficult for people to get to work. But I'll get onto that a bit more in later slides. But as we talked before, people, don't tend to perceive things properly. So if you've made the journey in the car all the time and you're stuck in traffic and there's congestion, weighing that up against doing something different that you don't know whether you're going to be even later or it's going to cause even more trouble, we have that loss aversion that will just put us off even risking that potential benefit unless we can be really sure that it is going to benefit us, because we know what the car is doing, we know what the situation is there, we're comfortable working and using that form of transport. One case study that we came across, which was a good one, was in Perth, Australia. What was really interesting about that is that they'd done a lot of work to influence sustainable travel behavior. They even have free buses, and they had all sorts of great uptake on people traveling by bus, by bike, and different modes of transport. And then they built a new great big car park. And the researchers who were involved in that hospital then saw this massive increase in people driving to work again. So it shows that even when you've got people doing what you want, if you give them the space to drive, they will tend to go towards that if they can afford it and if they've got a car. So thinking about whether you've got the opportunity to restrict, it's contentious and it's difficult, and people really do not like you if you take parking away. But what we also found was that, okay, maybe you are in a place where you really can't take parking away, or maybe you've even already got very limited car parking and it's very difficult to manage. But having those systems in place that allow you to properly manage your car parking make a big difference on then how you act. It gives you the data to understand who's coming, when they're arriving, how long they're staying, where they work. And then you can start to act on trying to shift that behaviour and maybe move them into a different form of transport. So Warwick University, and there's some great information out there. This was part of the Transport for West Midlands Future Transport Zone, that they did a huge amount of activity on the Warwick University campus around sustainable travel. One of the things they did was to put in place systems that help you to better manage parking. And allow them to see who was coming and where they were parking and what they were doing, and then to start to act on that and maybe issue different permits and things like that. And so that's the next one is, we have a legacy of the system that was people coming into the office every day, and not everybody will have that now. There are some people that are in a hybrid working system. And if you have a parking permit that you pay for that gives, per day, that means you park, you're paying for your parking to park every day on that parking space. Where is the incentive to shift that behavior? And it would be really helpful to maybe have more flexible parking permits. And then how can you incentivize sustainable car use? So there's lots of examples and things like lift sharing, getting priority parking, or better, cheaper permits because they can demonstrate that they are using more sustainable modes of transport. Next slide. I'm going to speed up a bit now. So having suitable alternatives, again, seems like a really obvious one, but if you don't have access to sustainable travel alternatives, then you can't use them. The difficulty that many companies face is that they can do stuff on site, like putting in bike lockers, or, and try and incentivize and get people to purchase or try sustainable travel modes. But it's very difficult to influence, like, the bus routes and the trains and the bike routes that are around your site that people will be using to travel to work. So getting involved with local authorities, with local kind of partnership groups, local business development groups, will all put you in a good position to be able to influence what's happening off-site, and it's really important to have that ability. And what's really helpful there is having data that you can show to a bus operator to say, well, look how many people arrive at my site at this time, and your bus stop is 2 miles down the road, please, or your bus comes an hour later. How can we address this? And if you can put that data in front of the public transport providers, then they can start to take action. There is also that element of improving perceptions. People really can be quite negative about using sustainable travel modes or doing things differently. I am a really big advocate of the sort of getting people to try things once. I'll come on to this in the next slide as well. But I think because it's quite difficult to address perceptions in sort of written or communicative material, if you can just get people to have one go on a different form of transport, then it starts to open the door for them to do it more often. And there's a case study. You can find more information about this case study in the Como UK. I can send all the links to the things that I've mentioned, who have a shared mobility workplace toolkit. The Pump House is a small business in Nottingham where they actually had to travel between two sites. So people would bring their cars in order to do that journey. So what they did was buy some e-bikes so that people could travel between those two sites without needing a car, and that sort of opened up the possibility for more sustainable travel across all the journeys that staff were doing. Next slide. So one of the trickiest ones is habits. How to break habits is very difficult, and if anyone manages to really crack it, they would be very wealthy, I think. You may have heard of nudge. It's a very famous behavioural economics book, and it influences. It talks about how we can tap into that type 1 thinking, that systems 1 thinking, of removing any barriers, making something super easy so we're not even thinking about it, we just do it. And so anything that you can do that puts people in that position where they're not even having to think, they're just doing. Again, I said test and trial days, and a really good example of this sort of thing is when we have the tube strikes, and I'm sure many people saw all those pictures of people on bikes and traveling in different ways because of the tube strikes. So any time that there's a disruption to journeys, that's quite a good way to get people to try something new. But also, just doing something, just one day a month, try a different journey. Moments of change is a really important behavioural change concept. And I believe the DFT might have some guidance on this. I need to have a look at that. But looking at the times in people's lives when it might make sense for them to change. Have they moved house? Have they got children starting school or leaving school? All these points will make decisions about doing something slightly differently. And so this is a time where it might be useful to influence people. Also, people are more likely to be successful in a change if they do it on a significant day. So on their birthday or 1st of January or whatever. The research shows that we're better at sticking at it if we do it on a significant moment. This well, I've only got 1 minute left. I'm really sorry. I have too many slides. People who, when you think about recruitment, think about what that actually people have already decided how they're going to get to work before they accept the job. And so often we provide information to people after they've taken the job about sustainable travel offers. And maybe it would be useful to do that within your job advert or within your kind of interview pack, because that's when people will make the decision about how they're going to get to and from work. Next slide. So culture is a really important one. How are you making sure, and I liked that video, it was clear that the culture of that company was setting an example from the top down, that this was an important thing that everybody was part of. Also, role models are really helpful. So that's not just senior people, that's people that represent staff and staff feel a kinship to, so that they can be helpful to encourage people to switch their behaviour. A good example is the workplace parking levy in Nottingham City Council. Here, the charge for the car park was applied to everybody, so there was nobody exempt just because they were very senior. If you wanted to drive into work, you had to pay for that the same as everybody else. Next slide. And a final one on incentives, and this goes over the East thing as well, like, are we making them attractive? And it's very important when you think about incentives, what are you actually incentivizing or are you rewarding? So have a think through. The BSIP Bus Service Improvement Programme was a government fund that supports bus use, but it also aims to address cost of living crisis. So it actually had 3 things that it was trying to incentivize, which could make it quite difficult in its delivery, I think, for some local authorities, although they had to really work through, like, am I giving this incentive here because I want people back on the bus after COVID? Am I giving this incentive because people are struggling financially and need the help? Or am I giving it to encourage new bus users? So making sure that you're really clear about what your incentive is trying to do will help you to build an incentive that is appropriate for the action that you want. Making it easy to access those incentives so it's not arduous, it doesn't take ages to download a voucher and copy a code and all this kind of stuff. And finally, making sure that the incentive is fair and that there's no way that you can, some people benefit from the incentive more than others. Next slide. Yeah, so there's a summary of some of the points I've covered. I'm sorry I had to rush the end, but it's good to have some time for questions. So it's all about understanding your staff, getting the data that you need, working internally and externally to create those solutions, and not being afraid of testing things, target them to specific groups, and then improve them if they don't work. Don't worry, some things won't work, and that's okay. There you go. Back to you, Mark.
Beth, thank you very much. Thank you for squeezing that in at the end. Some tremendous insights there. If you've got questions for Beth, please do put them in the Q&A, not the chat, and we'll come to those in a few minutes. Just last bit of housekeeping, we are recording today's session, so we will send the recording to you. I should have said that earlier. You've probably all scribbled loads of notes, so apologies for that. But the recording will follow on shortly. So just ahead of Q&A, and while you're reflecting on that and putting some more questions into the Q&A tab, just wanted to talk to you briefly about what I hope is a very practical piece of software that can help in terms of delivering some of the things that Beth was just talking about. So you may know that historically we were only focused on lift share for many years, carpooling. And what we decided is we wanted to address sustainable commuting as opposed to just car sharing. So to that end, we started surveying people across all the modes that they might travel on and understanding barriers to change. And again, some of the things that Beth was talking about, what is it that could encourage people to actually change their behaviour? We follow that up by doing a postcode analysis of where staff live and then understanding what options they have to travel more sustainably, and also where the gaps are. Because in our view, if we can better align those services to the needs of staff, then behaviour change becomes a little bit easier. That environment, again, that Beth talked about, of opportunity. So that was our starting point. And we also wanted to start to focus on this balance of convenience that we talked about. If you've seen our carpool guide, you would have read about this. Otherwise, we'll put a link into that later on in the chat. But the balance of convenience. So if I'm going to give up the flexibility of driving alone to my workplace, then what's the advantages of changing, and how does that balance against that maybe convenience that I'm giving up in terms of driving alone? So we developed something called Commute Boost to focus on that rebalancing, to help nudge and incentivize trial, but whilst providing live data for the employer. So that's really important, because if we're running and testing and trialing things, we want to understand immediately whether they're working or not have to wait for the next survey. And so that's what we did. And then we looked at, I guess, two other things that are probably different from what we might have thought about in terms of this type of software previously. One is the ability to capture data passively. And what that means is that an individual can give us the opportunity through the app, a commute window, we call it, to understand how they have traveled. And having asked the question a few times in the early days to make sure we've got it right, AI will kick in and we will understand without the individual having to do anything. So not having to think, in Beth's words, passive use, and we will understand how that person's commuting. And we can reward them accordingly, both for giving us access and also for traveling sustainably. And those rewards, which is the other bit where we differentiate, I think, don't necessarily have to be cash awards, because even though in our example there was £1 a day, that can become quite expensive in large employment situations. So the alternatives may be things like time off, leave early on a Friday, workplace privileges, car share bays, maybe even free lunches that offer great value to the individual, but perhaps you as the employer are paying a lot less in terms of the cost of those lunches than the reward that you're giving. So that's the sort of summary of CV, and we're just going to show you a very short video on how this works, and then we'll move on to the Q&A.
Mobility Ways has partnered with your workplace to help you commute more sustainably. Commute Boost allows you to join challenges and receives boosts for commuting sustainably. Getting started with Commute Boost is simple. 1. Sign up. 2. Join a challenge. 3. Enable permissions. 4. Confirm journeys. 5. Redeem your boost. First, you need to sign up. Download the Mobility Ways app for free from the Google Play or iOS App Store. Click Join a Community. Search for your workplace's community and then enter your details. You'll need to verify your email address to complete sign-up. You will also be asked to allow notifications. 2. Join a challenge. Choose Join a Challenge now to browse the current challenges at your workplace. View more details about the challenge, including what you have to do and what the boost is, and then select Join this challenge. 3. Enable permissions. Mobility Ways is privacy first. Only journeys to your workplace will be logged. No personally identifiable information is shared with your employer. In order to log your commutes, we need to enable location permissions and then allow Mobility Ways to access those in the background. Finally, you'll need to enable access to your motion and fitness activity. 4. Confirm journeys. Now all you need to do is commute to work as normal. Mobility Ways will automatically log your journeys to work. For the first few weeks, you will need to manually confirm your journeys. Then, the app will start to auto-confirm journeys. 5. Redeem your boost. When you complete challenges, you are able to redeem your boosts. Download the Mobility Ways app today to start saving money, cutting carbon emissions, and reducing congestion.
Okay, so I hope that was useful. A quick plug for our next event, which is taking place in a couple of weeks. So Transport for Humans. I'm sure many of you have heard of Rory Sutherland and Pete Dyson. Should be a really good event. It's not in a couple of weeks. I'm talking nonsense. 18th of November 2025 for that one. If you want to get that in your diary and register, mobilityways.com/training. And also I mentioned the carpool earlier, carpool guide, which we've written, and we're going to put the link to this and actually that event as well in the chat very shortly, so you can just download those and away you go. Right, we're on to questions. There are plenty of them, which is fantastic. Beth, are you back on with us? Lovely.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm here.
crack through these as quick as I can so we can capture as many as possible. Beth, what is the name of the combi book you referred to, please?
So it's called the Behaviour Change Wheel, Guide to Designing Interventions. I'd send a link over to the Mobility Ways team so that they can send out everything that I referenced in the conversation. But yeah.
Fantastic. And then in terms of East, are there any go-to comms organizations organizations could borrow from? Sorry.
Yeah, so again, if you just Google East BIT, it will come up, but I will send the link over. The Behaviour Insights team have all the sort of a whole kind of reference pack that you can have a look at there and information.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for that, Chiquetta. Right, what's the next one? What has been the most surprising finding that you've worked on?
I think I would probably say, well, maybe it's not surprising, but I think when some of the work that we've done and with the NHS was, and our recommendation out of that was invest in your car parks, or and to anyone, that's sort of something I've taken forward. It was something that surprised people a bit, because they were asking about sustainable travel, and our response back, actually after speaking to staff and looking at the data and investigating it all, was you can't do any of this if you don't have a good modern car parking system, or if you're a large employer. I mean, obviously for smaller employers it's easier, but the having control over your car parks and being able to kind of offer almost a really exemplar car parking experience really gives you then the opportunity to offer a wider, encourage wider travel. So things like being able to pre-book parking spaces, or being able to see how full car parks is a really helpful tool that will, if you can tell someone before they leave home, the car park's nearly full, by the time you get here, you're going to be driving around 15 minutes trying to find a space, then maybe they can make the decision to travel in a different way. But if you don't have that investment of number plate recognition or some way of doing that, then you are going to struggle to have that level of communication with your staff.
Great, thank you. I think we could probably both have a go at the next one. So from an accountant with a London-based office that's been set an SBTi target requiring commute emissions to be reduced by 42%, how could that be realistically achieved in this kind of context? So they only work 2 days a week in the office. Car sharing, switching to electric cars still carries emissions. So I guess it's about how to address or reduce commute emissions within the London context, and is 42% as a reduction target realistic? I guess my initial take on that would be, let's understand what's already happening. So we really need to undertake the survey. We need to understand how people are actually commuting, and then we can work out what the current baseline is. It's a starting point. Then, in terms of postcode analysis, let's work out what options people have, because although you're in London, as we saw with the tube strike, when we had an extra 600,000 cycle journeys on a single day, people could go and cycle rather than be on the tube. And there may well be others who are travelling first to a train station, driving alone, and then getting on the train and then coming into London. So I couldn't possibly answer whether 42% is realistic until we actually understand what the starting point is. So that would be my take. Beth, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to know, because being in London, you would assume that actually there's fairly low amount of car journeys to work anyway, because even most people don't. It depends where in London you are. So it'd be interesting, like you say, it's really important to understand what's happening. I would say the other thing is understanding how you're calculating those emissions, because if you're looking at the emissions that come from current bus travel, for example, then TfL are going to do your job for you as they shift the buses to electric and other things like that. So yeah, it's understanding what you mean by commuting emissions, is that and understanding how you're calculating that, and then some of that actually you won't have to worry about, because general decarbonisation of vehicles will happen anyway. Are you modelling that in, and then what you've got left is the stuff that you actually need to address going forward. But yeah, so that would be further conversations with people like Mobility Ways and Cenex to maybe help you do that.
Okay, I'm going to jump to this one. Beth, do you think there are different approaches needed for commutes of different lengths? For those who travel a long way, a car may be the most appropriate option. An EV might be the right answer. For those who travel a middle distance, the options change, as do the incentives, barriers, etc. For short distances, a different approach is needed again.
Yes, is the short answer. Absolutely, and it will get you nowhere. And that's where we talk about targeting and understanding what's happening, and then what you can act on. So we'll get you absolutely nowhere if you go to people that travel 20 miles on a route through country lanes where there's no alternative transport, and tell them they should be cycling to work or whatever. There might be one or two people that are up for that, but the vast majority do not have other options. And it's not just about the length of the commute, it's also about the individual's context outside their lives. One of the things, again, through the NHS that we found and highlighted was that with a higher proportion of female workers and females tending to take on a higher proportion of caring responsibilities, there are a higher proportion of people who their commute is not just one journey to and from home, that actually it may be a school pickup, it may be a trip to see an elderly relative or drop off some shopping, it may be, and so then asking them to switch is a much harder task, because they've got a whole lot of stuff going on in their lives, and that's why getting a good understanding of who is it easy for, and then if it's harder for some, what are the solutions in that space? And EVs, salary sacrifices schemes, things like that can be really helpful as well.
Fantastic, thank you. We've only got 2 more minutes, so I'm going to pick the short ones. Matt Sawyer, thank you for all your questions. I'm going to come back to one more of yours. You've been typing furiously, so I will come back to another one. Just a quick one. What countries is this app active for? Can it be used for India, Vietnam, Romania as an example? Yes. Are there good examples of organizations in practice who have switched behaviors for the better? Yes. If you get in touch with us, because you're anonymous on here, we can supply you with a number of case studies. I'm sure Beth can as well. Thanks for the presentation. Which organizations have used the behavior knowledge that's been outlined today?
Well, we've worked with one of our largest clients has been the NHS, and I see, but what I often see is that you have sustainable travel officers who, without even knowing it, are applying some of this stuff, but then you have some key gaps around some of the thinking, some of the things like, is it timely, is it targeted? that they just haven't really had the time to sit through, and also that background data of helping you understand who can do what. So yeah, I think I even saw Barry from Manchester is on the call, and he has some great experience of employing good behavioural practice in their hospital there. So there's one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to ask one more. We will get back and answer all the other questions. If you've asked it anonymously, if you wouldn't mind sticking your name in, and then we can come back to you with a bespoke answer to yourself. So one last one from Matt. Beth, have you insights on the best ways to engage local authorities and others in the off-site services and infrastructure? There are local plans being developed, but town planners feel very car-centric in their thinking. How can this be changed?
Yeah, that's a big question for a short amount of time.
And you have 20 seconds.
Yeah. I think, it depends. It's very local context dependent, isn't it? So if you're in a area, and particularly cities, it tends to, in some ways, be a bit harder because they're bigger, but then easier because they have the congestion issues, and they tend to have a bigger team that is addressing some of these things. So the first point of call is, if you're not talking to a local authority, then go and bang on some doors. And it's often really hard to find the right person. That's what we've found with a lot of private sector organisations. They want to talk to local authorities, and there's probably someone in the local authority that really wants to talk to you, but finding a way to match is difficult. So look for those networks, look for those opportunities. When there is consultation on things like local plans, go along and make a noise. Things like the Section 106 around property development can be a really helpful tool for a local authority to increase access to sustainable travel. So as a business, if you're getting involved with that and putting forward what you need, asking for what you want, as I said, having data is really helpful to put in front of people to say, this is what's happening at my site.
Totally agree with that. That data is crucial in terms of those conversations. I'd also get involved with the enhanced partnership. If you look for an enhanced partnership in your area, because that's been pulled together to direct the spending of BSIP funding that Beth referred to earlier around public transport. We're doing a project with the North East Combined Authority at the moment where we're engaging with about 20 different organisations to provide the data, both at our organisational level and also at an aggregated level, to help with the planning of bus routes and so on. So there are the opportunities to engage. If you need help with that as well, we have got some good contacts up and down the country. Do talk to us and we'll see if we can help. I think the key is understand your own position, have the data for your own position, so you can go and have those informed conversations with both local authorities and transport operators. Okay, I don't think we can talk any quicker. It's 3 minutes past. We're going to have to call an end to today, but thank you all very much for joining. Really appreciate it. Thanks again, Beth, for your really excellent presentation, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Have a good rest of the week. Cheers. Bye-bye.